what kind of antiviral drugs would be required, what kind of vaccines. The nature of this resolution would itself continue to undergo change depending upon the strain of the virus, nature of the mutation, and so on. One other thing about this book, with which personally, as a non-scientist, I'm particularly impressed and concerned, is the authors dilating at some extent not only on the pandemic and the virus and the problems that's created world over, but certain facets, certain aspects of global governance, how nation states are yielding their authority to multinational corporations, which are flourishing, exploiting the situation, even in the diversity of nations. Even when there is a pandemic, multinations have made millions. The consequential inequality, which is also galloping at a fast speed. Problems related to the pandemic, problems of climate change, interrelated issues in terms of human habitat, in terms of the animal kingdom, the bird kingdom, our relationships. If we eat animal food, non-vegetarian food, where do we keep the animals? Where do we cut them? Where do we have butcheries, hatcheries? Where do we keep the birds? The sanitation, and various other important aspects come into interplay. And this entire business of large cities and urban mess, how they contribute to the extension of problems of medical health, particularly in terms of the role that virus plays. So I would not say anything more because we've got scientists here to speak, except to say that notwithstanding the various limitations which we may have in India, a country of near 1.4 billion, and all the shortages and deficiencies which we have in the arena of medical care, healthcare, I think it's a great tribute to the scientists of our country, to the medical profession, to the nursing profession, the paramedics, and all those who have been involved in the past 2 years and more, which we've seen for ourselves, even in this institution, of how readily we got help when we needed it, in terms of vaccination or in terms of hospitalization. We had shortages, particularly of oxygen. One doesn't need to go into that. But that has given us a forewarning that if this pandemic, God forbid, continues in some form or the other, or a fresh pandemic emerges in the times to come, which you can't foretold, can't prohibit, can't say it won't happen, then the level of our preparedness in terms of medical preparedness, medical assistance support, ventilators, oxygen, nursing staff, beds, ventilators, intensive care units, all this is a vast area of responsibility, which then gets connected when we talk of the virus. So I would say, in one word, when we are discussing the pandemic, the COVID, the corona virus disease, then there are a host of issues arise which every country, every nation state, every government has to deal with, combat, and find solutions. So I would end by congratulating Professor Hasnain and his co-author, Professor Tiwari, for this very wonderful contribution in the field of science, in the field of popular understanding. And I would venture to say that the issues raised therein, the exposition, the clarity, would require policymakers, not only in the Western countries or developing countries, the policymakers the world over, to read this book, to see the messages it sends out in terms of science and technology, in terms of financial management, economies, health management, medical management, urban infrastructures, slums, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shri and Vohra, sir, for your deep insight on the pandemic and the book. The last 2 years have indeed been pretty horrendous for most of us. We've all dealt with personal tragedies. We have all been burdened with existential questions. We have all been horrified by the Schadenfreude we saw around us. And perhaps many of us have questioned when and how we became so desensitized to the visuals of horror we saw on television. And yet, there have been stories of humanity that have touched us deeply and given us hope. In the last 2 years, we've all become experts on the coronavirus. There have been so many mythologies, so many confusions, and so much misinformation. This book addresses most of these questions head on in a matter-of-fact manner. And I think that's what makes this book so hard-hitting and also, in a sense, cathartic. Just like the virus spared no one, whether it's the people in power, the scientists, the capitalists, and most importantly, the doctors, this book spares no one. We have an eminent panel, an eclectic panel. So we will get various perspectives on the coronavirus and how it should be decoded. But to begin with, I request Professor Hasnain to introduce the book, Decoding the Pandemic.
Mr. Vohra ji, Professor Srinath Reddy, Justice Shabihul Hasnain Shastri, Bagla, Jasleen Vohra ji, friends and ladies and gentlemen. If you go back in history, you'll realize that Spanish flu of 1918 is rightly considered as the mother of all pandemics. It infected 500 million people, about 1/3 of the world's total population, and caused 50 million deaths all over the world. As of yesterday, SARS coronavirus 2, the virus that causes COVID-19, has infected about 0.5 billion people globally and has taken more than 6 million lives all over the world. Vaccines against COVID have been administered to an overwhelming 11 billion people all over the world. The largest vaccination effort ever made in history. Unfortunately, the number of vaccinated individuals in low and middle income countries have not been the same as rich and developed countries. On September 17, 2021, India created a world record, which is unlikely to be broken by any other country in the world. And this record was of administering 25 million vaccines in just one day to mark the Prime Minister Modi's birthday. This has been a record of sorts. Due to this pandemic, millions have been unemployed due to lockdown and loss of jobs. It also created a huge income inequality, and many of us are aware about it. About 2,100 billionaires globally own more of the world's wealth than 4.6 billion people at the bottom of the global wealth pyramid. Look at the way wealth is distributed globally. US President Joe Biden acknowledged that 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic. Yet, at the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America, just 650 billionaires in America, saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion. And today, 2 years after the pandemic started, they are worth $4 trillion. Just 650 people in the world are today worth 4 trillion. So this pandemic has caused human sufferings for a large majority of population, citizens of the world. It has also become a catalyst for acquiring wealth. I am a medical microbiologist working in the area of tuberculosis. When the pandemic came in and lockdown was declared, I could not get access to hospitals and access to patient care materials. So we decided to do something sitting in the office, sitting in the lab, in my office at home. And that's where I got into COVID-19 work, coronavirus research. We published a lot of papers, including a paper we published about a few months ago that has been cited 150 times, more than 150 times. So in our book, Decoding the Pandemic, we have tried to present a 360-degree view of the worst pandemic of this century. COVID-19 is indeed the worst pandemic of this century. In this book, we have attempted to crystal gaze and present a global picture encompassing not just the biology, but as rightly enumerated by Shri Vohra ji, the politics, economics, and the business of COVID-19. We conclude our book by flagging questions which are in all our minds, some of which you'll get answers in the book, others for which you will have to wait and expect answers to come. For example, how long people can wait between doses. Today in a country like India, where third booster is not still common, those of us beyond a certain age are being reminded that your booster is due. But I can't get a booster of my own choice. The question is booster really required? Why not leave it at just one shot? And also, the important question, should we do a mix and match? In India, we have primarily two kinds of vaccines. The one made by our own Indian company, Bharat Biotech in Hyderabad, Covaxin. And the other made by the AstraZeneca, made by an Indian company in Pune. Many countries, including the US, are encouraging a third booster. Will there be a fourth booster, fifth booster, sixth booster, and more of them? We have no clue as of now. The important question which is seeking answer is how long immunity will last. It has been seen that the neutralizing antibodies, the antibodies that neutralize the virus and prevent you from getting morbid, getting sick and death, has been seen, which helps to block the reinfection, start to decline after around 6 to 8 months, after which you are as good as not vaccinated. In most people. In some cases, even within a few months. Will we ever get immune memory by the B cells and the T cells, the arms of the immune system of our human body, to block viral reinfection? To be honest, I don't know if we have answers to that yet. Why are we seeing increased cases of breakthrough infections? I got my COVID infection after I took my second dose, 5 months after I took my second dose of Covaxin. But the good part was, I had almost zero symptoms, just mild throat irritation, and low fever only for a day. All my parameters, including oxygen tension, were normal. We call this in our term as breakthrough infection. It has broken through, passed through your immune corridor that has been built because of vaccination. What about new variants? The paper that I'm referring to, which has received more than 150 citations in few months' time, 5 or 6 months' time, talks about the mutants coming in India. Were the mutation in Omicron a measure of retaliation by this virus? Omicron was the latest variant, latest mutant of coronavirus, which is creating news. It is expected, actually been found, that more people have died of Omicron in the US in 2021 than people died of Delta in 2020. This is the US figure. So is the virus realized that human science, human biologists are trying to neutralize me, trying to attack me by making use of my spike protein? So why not I mutate the spike protein? The virus has completely mutated, 30 mutations, unprecedented, all in the spike protein and other mutations also, which are more like a test mutation to look at the temperature of the water. How intelligent this virus is. So will it tomorrow mutate other targets, or is it asking us, you have made vaccines against spike, you better make vaccines against other proteins. Otherwise, your vaccines will be inactive. Is this scenario a real, or is it only a guess? Will it then mean that new targets will have to be seriously considered for vaccine development? And all our existing vaccines that we are using today will be of no use? Friends, I don't think I have answers to that as of now. Immunologists, infectious disease researchers, and virologists are almost unanimous that SARS-CoV-2 cannot be eradicated. And I repeat, cannot be eradicated. This is not my opinion alone. It's the opinion of all those who have some knowledge about how the virus works. Even if it is subdued, we all are likely to have what we call it as a long COVID. No symptom, but tomorrow your other systems of your body will start showing some effect. In the best scenario, COVID-19 will become endemic, which means it will be just like tuberculosis. It will attack you when your immune system is lower, for whatever reason. It will continue to circulate in pockets of the global population, particularly those countries which have not seen that level of vaccination. Fortunately, India is not among those countries. And life will move on yet, as it always has. Friends, that this could as well be a wishful thinking can indeed be true, as human intelligence, it is a fact, human intelligence has so far only been able to follow the trail created by this virus, which is the smartest pathogen known to humanity ever, and not the other way around. The reverse has really rarely been true. This is the kind of scenario we are living in. This is the kind of scenario that we are finding today. And with this scenario, what we have tried to do is to present in as lucid form as possible, not just the biology of the virus, but also addressing all these questions. The response has been very well. The book has already been released in the West, in the US, in Germany, in France, in Thailand, and today Mr. Vohra has formally released the book in India, but it's available on Amazon, and there are books available outside. Those of you who would like to take a look at it, by all means, please do that. Thank you once again for being here.
Thank you, Professor Hasnain. The denouement of the pandemic has been very interestingly presented in this book. And this perspective, there's a perspective in one of the chapters where Professor Hasnain has talked about the the pandemics and their connection to some of the major landmarks in human history. For example, in 1919, the swine flu broke, and before that, we'd had the war. It goes on with many of the other pandemics, including the one in 2009, is it? The H1N1, which is associated with the fall of the Lehman Brothers, and what a disaster it was for America and for the world economy. A lot of these things, when you see by hindsight, you can kind of correlate and read about it, and it makes a lot of sense. But I want to talk to you, Professor Reddy. As a public health expert, did anyone anticipate this sort of a thing to ever happen?
Me?
Yes.
You are the public health person.
Well, the magnitude of the pandemic might not have been anticipated.
Okay.
But the fact that we were going to have epidemics and pandemics principally of zoonotically transmitted microbes was very clear from the trend of the last 60 to 75 years. Almost 2/3 of all new infectious disease outbreaks have been related to zoonotic transmission of microbes. That means from animals to humans. This is not because animals have suddenly become malevolent towards human beings, but because we have built conveyor belts for release and transmission of viruses and vectors and other microbes, which were hitherto confined to forest-dwelling animals, and let them come into contact with veterinary populations, whether free-living or captive, and into human habitat. By extensive deforestation, we have blurred and damaged the ecological barriers that exist in nature, which prevent the transmission of these confined microbes and let them loose in human communities. Simultaneously, the methods of transmission within the human population have increased. Because of increasing population, there is a much higher population density, but at the same time, there is a very rapid and extensive commuting of people within cities, between countries. So the microbes such as these, especially SARS-CoV-2, they travel with people and celebrate with the crowds. So it's natural that we are going to be seeing many of these pandemics. So in future too, we are likely to see this. But we do need to build our barriers, not merely in terms of scientific advances, in trying to provide better defenses for ourselves with vaccines and medicines and test kits and so on, but be much more respectful of natural barriers. And we need to provide an appropriate ecological response as well. Joshua Lederberg, who at the age of 38 was one of the youngest people to get a Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1958 for describing microbial genetics. In 2000, he wrote an article in Science on infectious history, on the history of infectious diseases. In that, he says, it is our wits versus their genes. And he argues that it is incorrect to use militaristic terminology saying that we are going to eradicate, exterminate all these microbes. We'll have to learn to live with them intelligently in the same ecosystem. David Quammen, who wrote a lovely book called Spillover, describing many of these zoonotic epidemics across the world, says it is ecology that opens the window, and then it is genetics that sees the opportunity. So we will have these, but how much we can limit them in time and in dimension of spread across the world is a challenge to human intellect and ability to utilize the knowledge that we are accumulating much more sensibly.
Thank you, Professor Reddy. You talked about the zoonotic dispersal of this sort of thing. That brings me to this question of the politics behind this. We talk about bioweapons, we talk about other kinds of ways to destroy humanity in its entirety. I want to talk to Shri N. Vohra ji, long eminent bureaucrat. He has always been in governance, important positions he's held. He understands defense very well. So do you think this could have been one of the reasons? Because that is also one of the mythology that has been going around.
Pardon?
Professor Reddy is talking about how this has spread and how ecology has changed, or we have destroyed it. But do you also think that there is it's a more deliberate kind of an effort towards creating these kind of viruses? These are the stories that were going around.
As Dr. Srinath said, you see, we have to now get concerned with the ecology,
Yeah.
the larger parameters. Where do we live? How do we live? Where do we go to work? And so on and so forth. So the ecology becomes extremely important in terms of proliferation of the various diseases, and particularly the virus, the microbiology of the whole thing.
Justice Shastri, what was your opinion when you read the book? Do you also feel that, because Professor Hasnain has talked about these things in the book, that how much of these are the stories, the various theories that were going around, that there could be a deliberate move to threaten the world. These are the stories we all heard. What is your opinion on that?
Thank you, Jasleen. Before I come to your question, if you give me a minute, I first want to congratulate Dr. Hasnain.
We all do. We congratulate him.
Yes. For his book, and especially because normally the judges are always assisted in the court by the lawyers. If they present a case, we are duly assisted by the respective lawyers, and they open up their case. This is the first case where only the written argument has been given. And I've been able to understand the case, and I'm being asked to pass a judgment. And it had become a little gloomy, so make it little lighter. I may add that Hasnains are normally very intelligent.
I agree. I think we all agree. They appear to be so.
So some of the glory may also.
Are you related? Are you
No.
by any chance related?
All the Hasnains, wherever they are, irrespective of their. So coming back to your question, I'm not really very confident and competent to answer the conspiracy theories which has been dealt with in this. And I would like to talk about a different angle, because I'm neither a scientist nor a politician also. But as a judge, as a man who has seen people in the cases and everything, incidentally, I was also a victim of coronavirus in the very first phase. I was in Lucknow at the time. The two things I want to point out. My house was located on the highway, the outskirts of Lucknow, the Lucknow-Gorakhpur highway. So I was not only a victim of this virus, but I was also witness to the migrant laborers who were rushing through that main highway. And I was on the 7th floor, although isolated in one room, but my room had a window where I could see those people. So one thing which always comes back to me is that he's talked about earlier pandemics, number of it. Definitely the scientists, I salute all of them. They have done a marvelous and a wonderful job to protect us. But the question is, what have we learned? As scientists, they may have invented things. You see, invention comes after the necessity.
Yeah.
So they have reacted to whatever happened. They were successful in inventing medicines, but nature has taken its toll umpteen number of times.
Yeah.
So as human being, as a human race, what we have learned, all these problems which happened in the earlier pandemics were repeated.
Yeah.
The human failure. And this is one thing in this, perhaps in this century, if one name has to be asked from each one of the people, a little boy, an old mother, and a teacher, or an illiterate, कोरोना क्या है, ये सब जानते हैं.
Exactly.
और कोरोना जो नाउन है, वो अमेरिका में भी यही है, और अफगानिस्तान में भी वही है. इन सब के बावजूद, has this factor been able to unify the people? Has it taken our attention that after God, this is one word which is common to everybody?
Yeah.
Everybody.
The gods can be different, but Corona was common.
Common.
Yeah.
And still, very soon, we have forgotten everything and we are having Ukraine war.
Yeah.
So
Strangely, nobody talks about any kind of an outbreak during the Ukraine war somehow. There are thousands of people who are stuck in bunkers, but nobody seems to have got Corona, or not to our knowledge.
yes. So this is what I'm, as a human being,
Yeah.
I was wondering how fast we unlearn whatever we have. We have seen bodies being thrown away.
Yeah.
We have seen in fact, I know, and it's very pathetic, some of the family members deserted their fathers or their uncle's body in the hospital, ran away, and there was nobody to bury them. So we have seen that also. Still, the empathy which should have come, it's not come. It is lacking.
Yeah.
So these are vital questions. He has raised these questions in the book. So I think that so far the science is concerned, of course they are galloping, but how far we'll keep reacting to the situations if we as a human race, if we don't evolve, there has to be an effort on that count also. The nations are as divided as they were prior to the pandemic. One country has tried to steal march on the other.
Yeah.
One has tried to benefit economically. Some has done it pharmaceutically. Poorer have become poorer. So what has the human mind learned from this? That is a question. I think a book should be written on that also.
You're absolutely right. What have we learned, or have we learned anything at all?
Yes.
Is the big question. But there have always been stories of the triumph of the human spirit. You've always found the one man who probably had just one roti which he shared with another person. It is always the haves who were too busy pontificating in their drawing rooms and didn't have time to really do something on ground. We heard so many stories about people doing langars, giving whatever they had.
He has woven that also.
Yeah, very beautiful.
Very, very, very beautifully he has done it. Very beautifully he has done it. And I want to devote a Sanskrit shloka, if you like,
Yes, please.
to him. That nripatvam cha viddottam cha naiv tulyam kadachana. नृपत्व मतलब राजा को और विद्वान को कभी भी इनकी तुलना मत करना. स्वदेशे पूज्यते राजा. राजा की पूजा सिर्फ उसके देश में होती है. विद्वान सर्वत्र पूज्यते. जो विद्वान होता है उसकी पूजा पूरे वर्ल्ड में होती है, हर जगह होती है. तो इनकी पूजा होनी चाहिए.
और ये जो राजा और प्रजा, the rulers and the ruled, उनके बीच में we could see major differences in the way certain countries were able to fight the corona, the way the pandemic was controlled in their countries. And then we had, people like Trump and his ilk who insisted on calling it you've quoted him in your book. What did he say? This is the Wuhan virus because China virus. Because Corona, what is it? Coronavirus sounds like a city in the Mediterranean or something words to that effect. But he wasn't the only one. There were many of these people with a certain amount of arrogance, a certain amount of being disconnected with reality. Various countries, we've seen it in, we saw it with Erdogan, we've seen it with some of the others, we've seen it with Putin, and closer home as well. I want to ask you, Pallav Bagla, because you were right in the hub center of things. Did you see this happening when people were gasping their last breath and television was telling them to bajao dandas and bartans and all that? Do you think that had an effect?
Difficult question.
Meaning, did the thali and thing had
No,
any effect?
Thali wouldn't have. What was the psyche of the people? Because you were there, you were reporting, you were meeting people, you were in your PP kit. We all saw that. So when there was desperation, when there was death, what was the reaction of the people you met?
Well, I was on the road almost every day
Yeah.
of the lockdown, from well before the lockdown to even now. I have been on the road, and Dr. Srinath would bear with me. This is not the first pandemic we have reported together.
Yeah.
Maybe the worst, but may not be the worst in this century. We still have to see more. Since 1994, when the outbreak of plague happened in Surat, I have reported every pandemic, every epidemic which happened, mostly from the ground. Yes, this was very different, but in my mind, I'm very clear that the Indian scientists delivered big time and
Yeah.
did very, very well for the control of the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Absolutely no doubt in my mind about that, having reported so many from so many different countries. Go back just about 2 years, RT-PCR kit test cost 4,500 rupees. Today it's 300, less than 300, all thanks to people like Dr. Hasnain and Dr. Nasri. And with Rajnikant, he's gone. The ICMR person was here, thanks to them. And vaccines, who could have ever imagined that we would be able to give by today we've given 1.8 billion doses
Yeah.
of vaccines to our people.
That is
So
remarkable.
It's
Yeah.
a remarkable achievement. A lot of people ask me, did we see an infodemic? Did we see a lot of fake news? I would strongly say, at least in India, we did not see that much compared to many other countries. Look at what is happening in Canada. There are riots for people who don't want the vaccine.
Yeah.
Look at France. In India, people are queuing up to get the vaccine. What a difference.
Yeah.
A lot of credit goes to Dr. Srinath for
Yes,
his
absolutely.
able communication. And you also asked about one small thing. Did we forget about some things? Well, you should know, when a cardiologist shifted from cardiology to public health,
Yeah.
there was some reason behind that. And India should be very grateful that Dr. Srinath actually shifted from looking at hearts to looking at public health and created a situation where we could respond in a wonderful manner. I wish his institution had been given the same kind of power which was necessary, but that is what it is. I also must compliment here, we have Arun Tiwari as the author of the book. We should not forget Arun Tiwari's linkage with former President APJ Abdul Kalam Saab. Just as the pandemic was unfolding, the desperate need was ventilators. And where did the ventilators come from? The ventilators came from a DRDO laboratory,
Yeah.
which had been given to a private sector technology transfer. And that is how Americans gave us 100 ventilators and made more news than a small company which gave us real solutions. And again, DRDO came to the rescue of India when we needed oxygen plants. So Indian scientists delivered big time. And
In fact,
let me complete one more
yeah,
small thing.
yeah.
On a lighter note, I have said two things helped. One, Indian scientists, there was a lockdown and they were forced to work from their homes and laboratories. Two, the government gave enough resources. जितनी चाय में चीनी डालेंगे उतनी मीठी होगी. So they gave resources for people to do work. And on a lighter note, many of the scientists were not able to go on their sabbaticals to Europe and America because the flights were cancelled. And when flights were cancelled, क्या करें? घर से कुछ तो करना ही है. कुछ करना है तो चलो RT-PCR किट बना देते हैं, PPE किट बना देते हैं, मास्क बना देते हैं. कुछ ना कुछ तो करना है. तभी हसनैन साहब भी घर से काम करते रहे. So on a lighter note, but that's how it is. Just before the lockdown, I had interviewed Dr. Balaram Bhargav.
Achha.
And he told me our mortality would be less than 2%, and it has hovered at less than 2%. The numbers are high because we have a population of 1.3 billion. That's what it is. If you look at the numbers and then say that India has done badly, I don't think, in my opinion, we have done badly in managing the pandemic. Yes, we could have done better in getting oxygen to all our hospitals during the Delta wave. I contracted COVID during the Delta wave, second wave. And I was in hospital at AIMS, Dr. Srinath's former hospital, who treated me for 8 days. And they were very clear. When I was admitted there, Pallava tumhe marne nahi denge. And they were very clear in their mind because I had had both doses of the vaccine. जो आपने अपनी किताब में लिखा है. Let me read out one small portion, which I think should be very beneficial for everybody. And Dr. Hasnain writes in this very beautiful book, can we speculate that an inactivated whole virus-based vaccine, such as Covaxin, where all the viral proteins are presented to the human immune system and not just the spike protein to neutralize the virus, will be the best bet to fight this virus? So, what a beautiful vaccine we got.
Yeah.
And the leadership also took that vaccine.
Yeah.
When Prime Minister Modi went ahead and took that vaccine, it gave the confidence that we had a winner in our portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Covaxin. We met the scientist from one of the labs in Singapore. And this is obviously off record, but we are all friends here. He said that Covaxin was the best vaccine that they had tested, hands down. And Covaxin has not been given the international acclaim that it should receive or the respect it should receive. But we know that it was made in India, and it is by far the best vaccine. That brings me to a question for you, Professor Reddy. See, one of the things that people faced was, while dealing with this pandemic, was, people became isolationist. So what a scientist did in America or in Europe or somewhere, they were not sharing information. Did that cause major problems as a public health expert? What do you think?
It is absolutely essential that, particularly when the whole of the world faces a public health emergency, that the strength of science which is distributed across the world is brought to bear in a collective response.
Yeah.
And that, to some extent, happened, but not to the extent it should have. For example, even to give credit to the Chinese scientists, they very quickly put up the genomic structure of the virus on the net. That enabled most countries to immediately start preparing vaccines and most importantly, test kits.
Yeah.
So, however, when later on commercial interests got into play, narrow nationalism of governments got into play, then we started seeing that whether it is supplies of test kits, supplies of personal protection equipment, later on of vaccines, all of these became instruments for power play,
Yeah.
both of political power and money power. And that actually created a situation where the benefit of these scientific products could not be disseminated as efficiently and equitably as was necessary. And with vaccine nationalism coming in a big way, and some of the vaccine manufacturers not only high pricing, but also restricting the supplies, demanding that countries, for example, in Latin America and elsewhere, should pledge their sovereign assets, give a timeless indemnity. All of these kind of conditions actually precluded the availability of many of these vaccines. Fortunately, of course, as Pallava said, we decided to emphasize that we will make our own.
Yeah.
And we did not yield to some of these arm twisting tactics. We did produce a better vaccine.
Yes.
If I may share a piece of information, when actually this was being discussed in the National Technical Task Force, and the question of the early licensing that was given to Covaxin was being looked at. Both Dr. Ganga Kedkar and I said, because of the multiple antigens, this is likely to be very effective against the variant. So I think we ought to go for it. And actually the committee decided, of course. And when I opted for Covaxin, many of the colleagues asked me, is it nationalism that you're trying to espouse? I said, no, I said scientific good sense. Because when you have multiple antigens, the variants which are developing defenses of their own, of escape mechanisms against the spike protein, are unlikely to succeed against multiple antigens. Why not do it? So I believe it was absolutely essential that we not only required social solidarity at the national level and at the global level, but in the field of science itself, there should have been ready sharing of knowledge. And even in terms of technologies, we ought to have advanced that much better. And whether it is mRNA vaccines, for example, which were actually at that time considered the best of the lot.
Yeah.
It was WHO which started a technology sharing center for mRNA vaccines, but it didn't get very far. Moderna refused to share its technology. Pfizer refused to share its technology. So if we are really going to be so narrow-minded and pursuing corporate profits or political leverage, when the whole world is threatened, then science stands to lose.
And humanity stands to lose.
Humanity stands to lose. That-
Justice Hasnain,
And just one point.
Yes, of
if I may react to one of the questions that you asked very briefly.
yeah.
You asked whether this is a natural spread or whether it's a lab manipulated virus which has been released. I think most people do believe, and rightly so, that this is actually a zoonotic natural release. However, there's one question that still needs to be asked. While there may or may not have been a lab leak, and it certainly would not have been deliberate, why on earth was gain of function research being done in that laboratory, funded by the Americans but done by the Chinese, where we are deliberately engineering a virus to become more infectious or more virulent?
Right.
Why play this Frankenstein's role and play with nature and sort of toy with danger? I think it is there that scientists also must show restraint. While we must demonstrate the strength of science, undoubtedly,
Yes.
in finding the right solutions, we must also refrain from using our scientific knowledge and curiosity from treading onto dangerous paths.
Especially when it leads only to destruction and disaster, and that without doing the experiment you can make out. Professor Justice Hasnain, I want to ask you,
Yes.
Professor Reddy talked about how, knowledge was not shared. There was no open source of knowledge.
Yes.
And that was to the detriment of containing the virus. You're a person of law. Could there have been, some sort of, well, we know when laws were passed in India, when Supreme Court was dictating that crowd should not be there, Kumbh Mela nahi hona chahiye. It happened. Everything happened the way it should. So do you think on the national level and on the international level, probably the judiciary system should have had sharper teeth?
Well, I may take you to a different angle. Indian Penal Code was drafted in 1862.
Okay.
And in every film you must have been saying, Dafa 302 Tajirat-e Hind mein sazaye maut di jati hai aapko. Since then, 302 has not been amended. But murders have not stopped.
Right.
So what I want to say is that law will never suffice if there are no law-abiding citizens.
Absolutely.
You have UNO and nobody to follow that.
Yes.
It is always the good sense of the people. You split an atom. It can give you electricity, as we were talking before that. And the other scientists will be employed by the respective governments for making nuclear warheads. Just now, just before this meeting, we were so casually talking about the warheads
Yes.
and the range. So all these things are also being done in the name of science by the scientists. So it is all in the mind of the people. And that is why I was saying it is not important what scientific inventions are being made, how and what for they are being used. There lies the question and there lies the answer. So many things can be done if the world comes together for the goodness. I think there will be plenty of goodness and everything, these antivirus drugs and antivirus inventions and everything. They can be everything. It is only because of the small prejudices and the so-called national interest. When you convert that ego of yours or the self-interest into a larger perspective, you call it national interest. And in the name of national interest, you are licensed to kill.
Absolutely. That's
So that is there why I talk that more emphasis and more discussions should be there for the human endeavor on the mental level and on the level of a heart surgeon who can see into the hearts may also implant a sense of dignity and goodness also while making the drugs.
That would certainly be an ideal situation if such a thing could happen. But Professor Reddy, Justice Hasnain talks about human behavior. Of course, capitalist societies, world leaders doing all kinds of things. But human behavior on the individual level, we know in India, and we know about this, we've had anti-vaxxers and people who don't want to wear masks all over the world. But in India particularly, we noticed that, mask pehno, sanitize karo, people took offense to that. Do you think we could have prevented a lot more of the pandemic and a lot more deaths if people had taken care of that?
Partly, I didn't see, at least in recent months, that level of opposition. There might have been apathy.
Yeah.
People might have said, okay, Q pen at a personal level, but there were no mass demonstrations.
Yeah, absolutely. On a
Against
personal
the
level.
mass vaccines. So in a sense, the classical Delhi spirit of ki farak panda comes in. But other than that, there was no fierce opposition as such.
Yeah.
However, I think there was also a lot of miscommunication and misjudgment on part of authorities across the world.
Yes.
For example, on the issue of masks, it was culturally and even from public health point of view, the conventional practice in Southeast Asia and East Asia that whenever somebody has a cold or an upper respiratory infection, to immediately don a mask to prevent others from getting infected. When masks were being advocated in March, April of 2020, WHO said, no, this should be left only to healthcare personnel in hospitals. You should not wear it. It's only droplet spread, so 6 feet distance, no need for masks. And most of the countries followed it, including India. Some scientists protested against it and said there is evidence of aerosol spread. It took a while. Of course, India started giving the mask mandate later on, even in June or July 2020. But officially, WHO accepted the masks are important for everybody, and that there is aerosol spread only on 30th of April 2021.
That late.
And CDC Atlanta accepted it in the first week of May 2021. So in a sense, the way we communicated science, or the way we actually analyzed the data, was also skewed a bit. Because the classic way of looking at science is, okay, where is the evidence? Where are the clinical trials? But there are other methods of evidence.
Yeah. And where was the time for this kind of evidence?
You see, you can, just because there's no clinical trial, you cannot ignore the experiential wisdom of Southeast Asia and East Asia, which they gathered during SARS-1 pandemic and elsewhere during MERS, etc. So I think some of our communication was not right. But I think in India, by and large, even if people did not observe whether it is crowding or whether it's not wearing masks or wearing masks on the chin or on the whatever may be the thing, there was no organized resistance.
I beg to differ because on personal level, as you said, a lot of people in Delhi say, "Ki farak penda hai?" After getting vaccinated, a lot of people used to say, "Hum to double masked hai, double vaxxed hai." So if you say, "Mask pehen lijiye," this is my personal experience. "Hum to double masked hai, madam," and that guy a week later did get COVID.
No, I agree. Yeah. I'm not saying that people did not flout it, but they did not question the need for vaccines. They only felt that vaccines had given them complete immunity, and therefore they were impervious to any fresh viral attack. That again was the wrong communication. Yes. Because right from day one, it was very clear that these are systemic vaccines administered systemically. They only produce immunity after the virus enters the body. They do not prevent the virus from entering the body. So they prevent severe infection, severe illness and disease, but not necessarily infection per se. So this again was an incorrect communication that आप वैक्सीन लगवा लीजिए फिर कोविड नहीं होगा, but कोविड हो सकता है जुकाम जैसा, कोविड नहीं होगा pneumonia जैसा. That is the message that should have gone on.
That message didn't go on, and our media expert will tell us why.
I beg to differ on this very strongly.
Okay.
Go back into the history. One of the biggest countries which gave the mandate for masking was India.
Agreed.
Late March, the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor, Dr. K. Vijayaraghavan, and this is whole documented in a documentary I have done, gave out an advisory on masks. And let's also give credit to Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Yes.
Well before, I don't know who advised him, maybe Srinath did, maybe Dr. Hasnain did, who did, but very soon after that advisory from the Principal Scientific Advisor's office, we saw Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressing the nation with a mask on.
Yes, absolutely.
A homemade mask on.
Yeah.
That gave the immediate feeling to the countrymen that masks are good, should be used, which is why we saw a lot of use of masks. I was there on the road all the time, I saw. Plus, I also beg to differ on another point. I think, see, when the call was given by our leadership, by the political leadership for lockdown, I have never seen such a silent India in my lifetime, and I'm not touching 59. I have seen the war with Pakistan, but the kind of silence we saw on the roads all over India was simply amazing. And that was because of a call given by the government.
Absolutely.
And Indians heeded to that. Same thing on vaccines. Almost zero vaccine hesitancy. Remarkable. I mean, look at this. Somewhere, I mean, कहीं ना कहीं तो scientific literacy हुई है, कहीं ना कहीं तो we have reached the last mile in telling people vaccines are important, masks are important, they will protect you. And people heeded to that. They did not go on the other extreme, like the truckers are in Canada,
yeah.
or the people are on marching on the streets of Paris. Is that what a developed country should be? I mean, we are not a developed country, but we did remarkably well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a lot of respect for our scientific community, and I go up, and also for the medical scientific community. They also saved my life. That's also another way. But
Yeah, and when you have
frontline workers, I place my community, which is journalists, and especially photographers. They were out on the road, in hospitals, in crematoria, in burial grounds. Hey, look at the pictures that Danish Siddiqui gave from the ghats of Varanasi when the man lost his life in Afghanistan. But look at his pictures, amazing. He spent enormous time giving us the right picture where we required. So in fact, hats off to even my community. And there are a lot of traumatized journalists, and I can say that we are trying to organize a mental health well-being camp for journalists, because there are lots of them who are traumatized now that the COVID is coming down, and they've seen a lot of the trauma from hospitals to burial grounds to families. So as a country, I think we've learned a lot, we've come out a lot, and in this march as for a new India, I think this has also shown our inherent strength. You may call it self-reliance, you may call it Atmanirbhar Bharat or whatever. It has shown our strength that we can do our stuff on our own. We don't need the Pfizers, we don't need the Modernas. What a beautiful thing the country did. Moderna and Pfizer were pressing on the country to give them access to our population. They said, okay, emergency use authorization done, great. But no liability waiver. They weren't able to market a single dose. जिसको कहते हैं you kill two birds in one stroke beautifully. उनका भी लफड़ा खत्म, marketing भी नहीं हुई. And we were saved from getting the vaccines which have kind of failed in America, and they are suffering the mRNA vaccines. Somewhere our policymakers did a pretty good job. Could have done better, especially the second wave. But then not everything can go right always.
Well, it's very true. Our scientific community, our doctors, the journalists, and of course, leadership needs to be thanked and praised for whatever they've done to contain the pandemic in India to as much of a length that they've done. We are coming pretty much close to the discussion. We could go on for hours, but I would like closing remarks from everyone, because I do believe, and the book also believes, that there is a future. The book ends on a positive note, although Professor Hasnain says we don't know where the virus will go, whether of course it will not end. But, just 2 minutes from each one of you to tell me what your opinion is about the future where the pandemic is concerned. I'll start from the extreme left.
I agree with the scientists in this. If they say that there can be a wave, there can be a wave. I cannot predict. But I also agree with Pallava that we have fought it very well.
Yes.
And we have the strength to fight it out. So we will fight it out, come what may. अभी एक शेर अगर आप इजाजत दें तो मैं सुना दूं क्योंकि बहुत ही साइंटिफिक बातें हो रही हैं, वो चलता रहेगा कि सितारों के आगे जहां और भी हैं, अभी इश्क के इम्तिहान और भी हैं. तो ये इश्क के इम्तिहान होते रहेंगे और हम लोग मिलके उसको अगर कोशिश करें सिद्क दिल से, ईमानदारी के साथ, तो we can fight out anything.
Inshallah, that will happen. And we do have the fighting spirit as long as we keep our masks on. Ameen. Professor Shabihul.
Thank you so much for asking me to say a few words towards the end. I think one thing which has done, as I agree fully with Pallava, it has created, for example, the decision that the government took, I must flag one or two decisions, very important. It decided not to entrust the job of fighting coronavirus to multiple science agencies. We have multiple agencies.
Yeah.
It said, no, only ICMR will do it. I think this was one reason why we succeeded the way we have succeeded. Had it been given to multiple agencies, khichdi ban gayi hoti. things would not have moved. So this was really a great thing it did. It also did another wonderful thing was, as was pointed out by many of us, Corona became a common name everywhere in the world.
Yes.
India में ICMR became a common name. Ask anybody, रिक्शा वाला वो भी कहेगा ICMR में जाना है, समझ जाएगा ICMR कहाँ है. Ask anybody, they'll say, what is ICMR? They may not know the full expanded form.
Absolutely.
Why was it? Because it also indirectly brought a degree of credibility to the scientific community,
Yes.
to the medical community. That here is a group, here is a organization within the government of India, within the health ministry, that has been able to do what it has done. And I think at time when you introspect and find out, introspect and find out how things have done, I think we have nothing else to do but to salute the decisions taken by the powers that be.
Absolutely.
All the decisions taken by the powers that be had a meaning. I would like to really commend the advisors who were advising the leadership to take these decisions. It was not easy. There were, of course, bits of hiccups here and there, but by and large, it's been a wonderful overall. And today, even if a June wave does come, I'm not too sure it will come in June or when.
There's a prediction for 21st June, 22nd June.
About June, sometime in June.
Precise prediction.
But that is a theoretical prediction.
Yes.
And theoretical prediction, as Pallava was saying a few minutes ago before we assembled here, उसमें आपको नमक नहीं छिड़कना पड़ेगा, पूरा मिर्च मसाला काला नमक सब छिड़कना पड़ेगा to make it palatable.
Yeah.
It has a lot of inbuilt problems. We don't know much about the virus. We don't know much about, as was rightly pointed, about the human behavior,
Yes.
the sociological behavior, the ecological behavior, and we're making predictions. So I think those predictions may not be true, but one thing I'm very sure, this virus is a very, very smart virus. ये अंदर बैठ के सोच रहा होगा, बच्चों आप बच के तो निकल गए हो, मैं अपने को इतना तेज बना दूंगा कि आइंदा आपको कुछ ना कुछ करूंगा जरूर. How it is doing, what it will do, when it will do, I have no idea.
Totally unpredictable. Mr. Vohra, what would you like to say in your closing remarks?
I would say on this very happy note you heard just now, we should close this discussion.
Well, we are getting there slowly, but I would like to have some remarks from Professor Reddy as well.
You are asking us to crystal gaze into the future.
Yeah.
And I do not know whether June 21st, the virus actually looks at the calendar and finds out what is the summer solstice and decides its calendar accordingly. But the fact of the matter is that the virus will continue to evolve into variants.
Okay.
But if the evolutionary biology follows its natural course, as the virus finds lesser and lesser number of susceptible hosts, whether because of vaccination, natural immunity, or mass protection, whatever, it has to become altered in order to increase its infectivity, but lower its virulence.
Okay.
That is what has happened to other viruses in the past, including the H1N1. So we ought to nudge the virus to become that kind of a less virulent virus, even if it becomes more infectious and causes something like a common cold or a mild flu. So the virus will follow the logic of evolutionary biology if we follow the logic of good behavior by protecting ourselves and not giving it a free passage on a super highway for transmission.
I think that's very beautifully summed up. And I hope people, all of us here are careful, but the world at large learns to protect itself. Pallavji, what will you say?
A very simple thought. I think a tiny, almost invisible, microscopic virus has humbled the supposedly the most intelligent animal on earth. And from that, the lesson is quite clear. Respect nature, respect the boundaries where things transmit from the wild into humans. And I must point out here, And there was one scientist in India who was trying to unravel the boundaries in India on bats and viruses. And it was, unfortunately, ICMR which has prevented her from doing it. So if we have to prevent future pandemics, we have to let Indian scientists who are working on the fringes where transmission happens from the wild into humans need to work more actively. And I can name the scientist here, that's Professor Uma Ramakrishnan from the National Center for Biological Sciences, who was working on bats in the Northeast. And there has been grave resistance to her work from within the establishment for whatever reason. And that kind of work needs to be strongly supported so that future pandemics as they unfold, and who knows where the next one emerge, whether it was Wuhan or whether it was America or whether it was France where this virus emerged, we do not know. But if it comes from India, we should be able to pin it down as ASAP. And for that, we need scientists like Dr. Uma Ramakrishnan to be working hard to give us the advance information. Dr. Ramalingaswamy, the legendary DG of ICMR, gave us the, what's it called? The ICD? The Disease Intelligence Network.
Integrated Disease Surveillance
Integrated
Program,
Disease DSP. When after the plague epidemic, we need to support some of that with strong gusto to make that so that we are well prepared and well forewarned rather than taken by surprise like we did this time.
That's very, very well put.
हिंदुस्तान के वैज्ञानिक कर लेंगे. मुझे बहुत फेथ है, बहुत फेथ. हम कर लेंगे. ये भी बचे, आगे भी बचेंगे.
Very well said. I think we should take Mr. Vohra's advice to change the topic. But, to have such an eminent panel, how can I resist it? I'm sure many of you have questions. We won't take too many, but one or two, please. Yes, please. Somebody give the mic.
Dr. Reddy, I think we survived because of our food habits, our indigenous food, and which is spicy, which is very much effective in comparison to Western food. They take boiled, and we take processed food with turmeric and spices. That makes a lot of immunity, and our indigenous system, Ayurveda, yoga, helped a lot. So, what do you say?
Sir, basically, I think Dr. Hasnain is the immunologist here on the panel. But you're right in a sense that basically our immune system also is substantially modulated by the nutrition that we take, both directly and also through the microbiome, that is the trillions of bacteria that reside in our gut and help our immune system. So it is possible that some of the food habits that we take do modify our immune response. But I believe that requires a little more of research to find out what are the elements that actually operate in that fashion. Certainly, it's absolutely important to pass on at least a simple message, even while we are trying to unravel those complex things, that innate immunity, which is one of the first defenses against any infection, through good nutrition, good sleep, good intake of water, and good sunlight, are absolutely critical, and they provide the first major body defense against any infection.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
And also lead to a sense of well-being. Question?
We also, one should also point out, Jasleen ji,
Huh.
that we have a very nice habit, which is of namaskar.
Yeah.
That keeps us, many of the viruses which come through touch are kept away. हम गले नहीं लगते, इधर उधर किस नहीं करते, धक्की नहीं मारते. Look at this. It evolved over a certain period of time. They are inherent in our systems. कहीं ना कहीं तो ट्रॉपिकल कंट्री में रहते हुए उसका फायदा हुआ ना. नमस्कार करते हैं, सलाम करते हैं, दूर से बात करते हैं. कुछ तो बात है.
So we must go back to our time-honored tradition, but I see one hand. Okay, two hands. You have the mic, so
Sir, I have one question to, I am from Sakal Media Group. Sir, one question to Srinath ji. So, as Mr. Pallava was discussing that we are not following the West in the terms of demasking ourselves,
Yeah.
and we are still following it. So I just want to have a, your thought on this, whether the booster dose, what the Europeans are talking on, second, third, fourth, whatever. Israel has done it for the third time for their citizen. So any significant research has been done whether this booster dose is helping out or not helping, or it is of any use? Because I believe the Indian scientists the most. The Europeans may have their different thought, but I need to know the Indian thought and Indian scientists.
So to boost or not to boost, that is the
Yeah,
question?
Yeah, actually, are they fooling around? The Europeans are fooling around, or because our government has still not taken as a booster as a step towards, this. So I need your thought.
Let me give a partial response and pass it on to Dr. Hasnain as well for his wisdom. Basically, I believe that the immunity produced by the vaccines generally does tend to fade in a few months' time, as Dr. Hasnain said, in about 6 to 8 months' time, if you measure the neutralizing antibodies. However, it is possible that the cellular immunity still may be active.
Okay.
It is also true that memory cells that exist also can get reactivated on fresh exposure to the virus. So even if you're not able to measure the antibodies at that point in time. And recent research also suggests that even non-neutralizing antibodies can still identify the virus and hold it for the killer cells to come and kill. But I'm not the real immunologist here. You have Dr. Hasnain there and Subrata over there, sitting there. They are the people who really study the immunology at the cellular level. But the fact of the matter is that there are multiple ways in which immunity can still be maintained. And even if people do get infected again, it may not be very severe infection. And therefore, in our country, where we are also using different types of vaccine as well, it is possible that we may not find the fast fade out of vaccine-related immunity as the West has discovered with mRNA vaccines. Secondly, despite all the unfortunate damage done by the Delta wave, a lot of people were exposed to the virus and they acquired a fair amount of immunity. And the natural infection has multiple antigens, and just like the Covaxin vaccine. And therefore, even if the virus develops spike protein mutations which can bypass the spike protein related antibodies, there are still other defenses available. But as far as studies are being concerned, there are two types of studies, at least. You study in the laboratory what is happening in terms of neutralizing antibodies. You study the other forms of cell immunity. But you also have to study breakthrough infections and reinfections. Now, all that data is being analyzed, and even the laboratory studies done by the National Institute of Virology are going on different vaccine-related immunity and natural infection-related immunity against different variants. So I think science is beginning to give us the indications, but at the moment, we appear to be in a relatively safe zone.
Okay. Touch
I'll
wood.
just add to what Professor Reddy said. The bottom line is, yes, boosters do help. And if you ask me, I would suggest take a heterologous boost. If you have been vaccinated by one vaccine, take another vaccine. Because the antigen, the spectrum would be, which the body will be facing, will be very different. So it's more likely to give you a lasting protection than what taking the homologous boost.
Okay, one last question.
Professor Reddy, you talked about zoonotic transmission. It has started from a bat.
It has started from?
A bat.
Do you have any study how SARS-2 impacted the animal kingdom, like it drastically impacted the human? My second question is, Sam Pitroda in his book, Redesign the World, wrote, COVID-19 pandemic is World War III. If it is so, it is the longest war going to be ever fought. So what's your comment?
Well, from bats to animals and animals to humans, there are definite ways of natural transmission. They are very well described in this book. I suggest that you actually read the book because we'll actually, all
we
the
have
methods of
covered this.
zoonotic transmission have been very clearly defined. But in terms of whether this is going to be the biggest war that we are going to fight, well, this has been the most major challenge that all of humanity has faced simultaneously for 100 years now. Let's hope that we don't have to repeat that experience again.
Thank you very much, Professor Reddy.
We have an expert sitting there.
Oh, so the expert has a question, so we must take that.
A comment. Clarification.
Expert
comment.
question, but a kind of a comment.
Yes.
That, we feel that global science has, in a way, if not failed, but has not really been there. But I would like to say that, look, we knew about this virus less than 3 years ago. And by now already, we have a huge array of vaccines, first generation, second generation. We know how it spreads, we know how it can be stopped. And we have a battery of drugs as well. And overall, even in the face of, let us say, financial interest, capitalist interest, and national interest, somewhere we are still better off than we have been with the previous pandemics in this shorter time. I'd like to remind that AIDS, HIV came in the late 80s. And for a long time, we didn't know what it was. And after that, for the antiviral drugs to come and work, and we still don't have a vaccine. So, of course, AIDS is a trickier virus in some ways. But the point is that here, the full force of science has actually enabled us to have solutions. Whether we implement solutions or not, that's another matter.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I see is that within India, one looks for positives everywhere. It really has spread out. One, the need, there is now perhaps a greater political demand for public health and public health measures for which we were perhaps apathetic a few years ago.
Yes.
But maybe people will demand more of it now. But we also look at it in the terms of, upgradation of our scientific facilities. We have real-time PCRs being done in district labs, villages, lay, tribal areas, and so on and so forth. So this is something that when we have been forced to react, we have reacted in a manner which, while not perfect, is still perhaps better than sometimes I would have anticipated for many things. For many things, perhaps no, but there are definitely positive ways in which, these reactions have come in. That's all.
And also the vaccine was developed in a matter of months, although we had previous knowledge of the SARS virus. So we were kind of, in a sense, prepared with knowledge. But to develop a vaccine so fast was remarkable.
No, absolutely. I think the science was really tested for its strength and it stood up to it.
Yes.
But then even the fact that manufacturing also went up to scale so fast,
Yes.
the distribution in the public was also very fast. All of these have been remarkable successes.
Absolutely remarkable successes. Any comment or question? Okay. As Professor Reddy said, most of the answers are here. So do buy the book and read it.
Okay, so my question is to the eminent panelist. With the diverse portfolio of panelists which we have over here. My question is that this is related to pandemic, not this one, but the upcoming ones. So given the ongoing and enhanced global warming and the supposed danger of upcoming pandemics, after revival of the unidentified Arctic viruses and microbes, which is speculated in the scientific community. So what should be the stake of the government, people, policymakers, scientists, etc., to slow the process? Because we cannot definitely stop it, but yes, we can slow it if we focus on it now. So that's my question to all of you, please.
No comments to make.
Well, I did boldly say that we need to be prepared. We need to be focused on trying to find where the fringes are, where the jumps will happen. focus on that. And we unfortunately have not let one scientist who is working very hard to do it get on with our work.
Yeah.
Basically, you have to try and prevent, to the extent possible, zoonotic transmission of dangerous, potentially dangerous viruses. Reduce deforestation, reduce consumption in high volume of animal foods, which again is an important element for zoonotic transmission. Build up your surveillance systems, One Health, which actually connects wildlife, veterinary population, and human population, and then try and track spillovers as soon as they occur so that you can build up good surveillance response and containment response immediately. So for that, you need a good epidemiological intelligence system plus a good public health system. And then, of course, ramp up your science in order to, whether it's genomic analysis of the variants or whether it is production of drugs and vaccines, make sure that you have the scientific capacity to counter it. But at the same time, make sure that you are sharing the information with the people, get the community connect, because without the people actually feeling that this is an important element, you're never going to succeed with only top-down approaches.
Absolutely.
And that's why we need the media.
Yeah. Ramp up the science. And I think we've been given a signal to wind up. So please excuse me. I hope that's all right by you. If you read the book, you'll find all the answers anyway. So let that be the hook. And I'd like to thank the chair, Shri and Vohra, who for being here today, Professor Srinath Reddy, Justice Hasnain Shastri, Pallava Bagla ji, and of course, Professor Hasnain, whose book this is. Thank you very much to all of you also for being here and being patient with us and for taking an interest in this topic that is exhaustive. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
अरे ऑथर को नहीं मिलती बहुत रखना तुमसे प्लीज मैं आपको गिफ्ट दे रहा हूँ आप इसको साइन कर लो सर उसको आप रख लो ऑथर को नहीं मिलती मैं लाइक टू हैव योर कमेंट फॉर द न्यूज़पेपर मैं हां दे देंगे तो देंगे अरे मी आपण घेतलं ते खाली आपण नंबर शेअर मैं ले जा रहा हूं उसको I look the background.